love vegetables. So I want to talk about my best summer ever, and I have to use the Wayback Machine to talk about my best summer ever, because my best summer ever was the summer of 2001. Yes, the last summer before 9/11. And I was 22 years old that year. My boyfriend at the time was 21. And that summer we went on a 3-month-long, 30,000-mile road trip in a 2-door Escort across the 48 contiguous United States. It was a pretty amazing road trip. He just graduated from college and I was between schools, shall we say. And it was the summer after the year 2000 presidential election. And Chris and I were just about as disenchanted with our nation as two young people ever could be. Here we were, barely drinking age, and we already needed a cure for our premature, curmudgeonly cynicism with the system. But we had some hope for our country. I mean, we believed in America that we had read about in books and heard about in music, and we decided to hit the road in search of that America. The one that Walt Whitman wrote about, the one that Jack Kerouac wrote about. We wanted Allen Ginsberg's America. We wanted the America that Simon and Garfunkel sang about on the soundtrack to The Graduate. It was an America we were nostalgic for that we had never known, and we were kind of afraid was not really the case anymore in our present day of political corruption and 24-hour network news. So we hit the road, and in that summer we went to Redwoods, Crater Lake, Olympic, Glacier, Yellowstone, Teddy Roosevelt, Badlands, Shenandoah, Carlsbad Caverns, Arches, Bryce Canyon, Zion, Grand Canyon, Death Valley, and Yosemite. It was a lot of grandeur to digest in a single summer, and I think that 13 years later, I'm still digesting it. But when I think about my best summer ever, the moment that sticks out in my mind in my great American summer wasn't seeing the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., or the Boston Harbor, or the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. It wasn't Martin Luther King Jr.'s boyhood home, or the grassy knoll from the 6th Floor Museum in Dallas. It wasn't the deep dish deep dish pizza, that I ate in Chicago. And it wasn't the hot dog that I had in the bleachers at Yankee Stadium. For me, the single greatest moment of my great American summer happened at Yellowstone National Park. And it all began on our second night backcountry camping at the park. My boyfriend Chris and I were hiking on the trail to our campsite. It was about 2 miles long and it was rated easy. Easy in my ass. I was not really used to carrying all of my gear on the back, and Chris, being the more experienced hiker, had most of it on his own back, but I was still struggling under the weight of my pack. We were trying to hike double time, or as close to double time as we could, because it had taken us a little longer than we expected to get to the trailhead with all of the traffic at Yellowstone, and we wanted to make it to our campsite before it was dark. Even though it was the long Wyoming summer, we knew that dusk was on its way. So we headed to the end of the trail, and there was our campsite, and it was like heaven on earth. It was so beautiful. Our campsite was inside this little grove of pines on a gently sloping hillside that was right beside a lake. And all I really wanted to do was lay down my pack and sit there and enjoy the shade and bask in the silence and being away from all the touristy crowds. But we had work to do. And so we divvied up the task, and Chris went to build the fire, make our dinner, and string up the bear canister while I set about putting up the tent. And I was totally focused trying to get this all done before the deep wilderness dark settled in, when Chris walked up to me and said, "There's a moose." And I said, "Nuh-uh, you're pulling my..." And I looked at his eyes, and he was like... And I looked, holy shit, that is a moose. Now, a little bit of backstory. Once upon a time, I thought that a moose should not be terrifying. In fact, I had been bitching to Chris since the Idaho Panhandle about how I really wanted to see a moose. Every everything I knew about moose came from cartoons. Rocky and Bullwinkle. Montgomery, the leader of the Get Along gang. And Disneyland's Bear Country Jamboree. There's this moose on the wall there, and he's, you know. So I was like, okay, who wouldn't want to meet a moose? And so I had said when we set out on our trip to go to all of these national parks and all this camping that we were going to do, that if I didn't get to see a moose in its natural habitat, this thing was going to be a total bust. And now here one was, like 20 feet away from our campsite. It was huge. And I mean, it was 7 feet tall, like 1,500 pounds, antlers 6 feet wide, and I know that moose are vegetarian. But they can run 35 miles an hour, and I'm not great at math, but that mass times that speed, danger, is all that I knew. So Chris was like, what do we do? He was asking me what we were supposed to do. That was not a good sign. Stand very, very still, I said. We didn't breathe, we didn't move, we didn't blink. And there went the moose, just kind of looking at us. And I was really scared in that moment, you know, because obviously he was dangerous, but there was another feeling that I had. And it was like I was trespassing. And that shocked me because the whole time we'd been going to all these national parks and camping out and seeing all these beautiful vistas, I'd just sort of unconsciously been acting like I was in a zoo or in a museum, like it was all just there for my amusement to enjoy. I think that the whole narrative of the national parks is that this is land that belongs to us, you know, to all human Americans. And what I realized in that moment, confronted with that moose, was that I had been exercising this enormous amount of unconscious privilege, right? Just sort of this entitlement to everything that was around me. Here Chris and I were thinking that we'd reserved our spot for the night, the National Park Service had issued us our backcountry camping permit, we paid the fee, here we had paperwork stamped with a federal seal of approval saying this campsite was ours for the night. But there was a moose, and it really felt like actually we were in his house, not the other way around. That federal seal of approval really didn't matter because the moose can't read. And I thought that I maybe even deserved to be there in that national park more than all of those other tourists because I had my Girl Scout values, right? I knew to pack out everything that I packed in. I knew to take only pictures and leave only footprints. And I had this real smug sense of superiority over all those other tourists who drove SUVs and ate McDonald's because I bike commute and because I shop at Co-op. Yeah, bikers! All about bikes, it's true. But, you know, that moose was really showing me that all of these things that I thought about it being my human responsibility to be a defender and protector of Mother Earth was just kind of bogus because it's their world. We're just visiting. It's kind of how it goes. So Chris and I were standing there kind of awaiting for the moose's judgment, whether or not it was okay for us to say or we were going to have to go, and we were just sort of standing there in a bubble of suspended stillness. The moose looked at us, and then he just kept going. He didn't alter his course, he didn't vary his pace, he just kept heading down the hill to the dusky lake where he took a drink of water. It felt like we were pardoned. It took a while for my heart rate to get back to normal after our close encounter with the moose kind, but that moment always stays with me, and it's what I think about when I think of the best summer ever. The first thing that comes to mind is that close encounter with the moose. That day, that moose's indifference felt like grace. Thank you.